All right, today is June the 12th in 2025, and my guest is Jose Luis Ricón Fernández de la Puente, also known, or he's the author of the blog Nintil, which is how I've come across Jose's work for a while actually, but I didn't associate his name and your name with the blog, and also noticing that you now work at Retro Biosciences, which is also in the longevity space, just as like I am with Infinita. I thought there's like lots to talk about, right? So also seeing that you have this background in philosophy, economics, libertarianism, all of that, pretty sure this will be a fun conversation. Um, you have an interesting title now with like head of theory at Retro Biosciences. Where's that coming from?
Yeah, so I guess first at Retro we don't have titles as such these days. We used to have more defined titles when we had titles. Indeed, my title was Head of Theory, which is still the one I use because it's the one I had. And it came from it was given to me by a CEO, Jovets Lacroix, when we were discussing me joining Retro. So I was initially looking for advice to start my own company, and I was talking to Joe for advice, and that ended up becoming me joining. And in that process, we're discussing, well, what am I going to do? I'm I guess, sort of a generalist, a very thoughtful generalist that has some technical skills in software, and that I like writing and reading very fast. And yeah, I thought, okay, we'll do a theory of like thinking about aging. What should we do? Synthesizing literature, synthesizing data, and so on. And so that's the name he came up with for this kind of strange role I have here.
Nice. And can you give our listeners a bit of a background? Sort of you have an kind of unusual career journey, right? But similar to me, you started philosophy and economics and writing and blogging.
Yeah.
Especially curious why you said on your Twitter, um, you know, how you were an NPC, how you became less of one, and how you're still not done.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good one. Yeah, so I mean, once upon a time, I studied what in Spain. I'm from Spain. It's called industrial engineering. It's like mechanical engineering adjacent. And then I got a master's degree in that same thing, and another master's degree in aerospace dynamics. So that's my actual training. Is a physical world engineer building stuff. My initial aim in life was to work at SpaceX and make rockets. What the real path. Well, I guess if you go back enough into the past, I went to study computer science and be a video games designer, but my parents thought that CS had no future. So instead, I went into like this more mechanical engineering stuff. In parallel, I was also interested in many things. I guess the mysteries of like I guess initially um, I guess going to the world, growing up as a teenager, I would see people arguing with each other about stuff, and it was like, why are people angry at each other? Why do the people misrepresent what they each think? I was like, wait, what is a good argument? What does it reasonable mean? And so that got me into philosophy very quickly, and into consciousness in particular, which is a topic that has always been there for me. And yeah, at some point around the internet, people talk about stuff. Some things are counterintuitive, and then I was like, well, I guess I was very smart with just like do homework and study, not much time. So I have plenty of time to do everything. So I was studying economics and philosophy on the side. It was for fun. And then I don't know, the longevity stuff came kind of later in life. Like my first encounter with it was when I read Ending Aging, the book from Aubrey de Grey in college. But funnily enough, when I read that book, I thought, seems these longevity people got this. It's so easy. It's going to be, this book seems so like there are these sense categories of damage. We're going to fix them all. Here's how they get fixed. Done. Great. Bye. And so I didn't think much about the topic for a while. and when I got back into seeing where is this the aging field at was when I read Lifespan from David Sinclair, which is also was my first introduction to reprogramming, which is a topic I was like, wow, this seems very interesting now. This is very intriguing. Um, and so that's at the time I was also interested in progress in technology in general. It's like there was this back then, people might remember this discussion about the Kurzweil singularity, everything's going slow, sorry, everything's going fast, it's accelerating. And the Tyler Cowen, Peter Thiel, everything is slowing down. We're not getting anything done. And I was like, wait, these things, these things are kind of, so what's going on? So I thought, well, some fields are kind of dead, like physics, and other fields are going very fast, like biology. And so I should understand what's going on in bio because I had zero bio training. And within bio, I guess that book came by. I think at the time I also met Laura Deming, at some point in a visit to San Francisco. So that going into aging, it's like, what's this aging thing? And after reading that book, I was like, wow, this seems very interesting. I want to go see more. And that led to me writing the longevity FAQ I wrote in my blog post. So my first like serious step into the field.
Great. And how did you get from there then to work for a company? You said you also were starting to look into how to build your own company and things like that. And then what are you doing now at Retro Biosciences? So you said you're kind of synthesizing the theory. So how does that lead to kind of like how does the everyday look like?
Yeah, I guess so. So when I wrote that FAQ, I was still like synthesizing what was out there. But it kind of left me like reading all these papers, and getting ideas for things that could be done that are not done, that they cannot just find in the literature. So then at some point, in collaboration with Alan Marblestone, who is now working on FROs at Convergent Research, we came up with this idea for something called Rejuvenome, which was a project to do study aging in mice subject to various interventions and measure everything, quote unquote, everything. It's had to measure actually everything. That was funded by Astera Institute and then done at the Bach Institute. That was supposed to go for 5 years, but it only ended up going for 1 in the end. After that, I was on an O1 visa. I guess like a number of O1 visas, but at some point I was like, okay, I need something next. And for someone like me, I like to like have my hands in all the pies and do this high level thinking and big ideas. It's almost like people, if you pattern match yourself toward people, it's like people like me become VCs or founders. That's what happens. There's like at some point in life, you're a kind of guy, and these kinds of guys do these things, and that's what fits for them. So yeah, another kind of person wants to go deep into one niche, narrow technical area, and they are happy doing that. And so, yes, I got into reading about Alzheimer's disease a lot at that point. Because cardiovascular disease I kind of understood, and cancer seemed like, kind of, mutations out of control. But Alzheimer's seems very mysterious and also maybe kind of juicy because there's so much controversy here on Alzheimer's, like data fabrication and all these things that fail in clinical trials. I'm like, what's going on? And so I got an idea for an Alzheimer's company using gene therapy, using in particular something called the Icelandic mutation that you could edit into the brains of people to make them resistant to Alzheimer's. And that was the idea I was discussing with Joe for a company. And then I joined Retro in the end. And what do I do here? So I guess some of what I do is, at Retro, I report to Joe, the CEO, and I have no reports to me. So I have zero formal power as such. But I look at the company and be like, well, what are problems we have? What are struggles we have? And I try to notice them and design systems to fix them. Like, for example, at some point we had some discussions about what is worth working on at Retro. So we have a mission, which is to extend healthy human lifespan by 10 years. But many things have been said to help with aging, but which should we actually throw millions of dollars at to take to the clinic for reals? It's all fun and games until you do a clinical trial at scale. And so I designed a framework to assess which programs are worth doing for us. We call it the clinical program framework. And so through this, we judge the programs we had, and then we chose the ones we used to be doing other things at Retro. We had a T-cell program, we had a plasma exchange program. Now we don't have those anymore, partly because we assessed their potential, not only scientifically, but also do they scale and how impactful will they be and how costly and so on. So I do things like that, like assessing what's happening sometimes.
Very intrigued by that, by the way. So first to nerd a bit about that framework, right? It also kind of it reminds me of my own journey. I did something very similar in a company before. Kind of, hey, we have all this stuff that we could do. Which ones do we focus on? And, did that. And then we had a successful product and later was the Series B. And then I went to become my own founder. So very, very intrigued by what your framework is to focus on the right things.
Yeah. I mean, briefly what the framework is. So we have this mission of Retro, which is to extend human lifespan by 10 years. And then implicitly we want to do that through aging mechanisms. Like we don't want to get distracted by treating a rare disease with gene therapy, for example. There are many things that could make money out there, but we just cannot do those things by design. So, but at the same time, suppose we have a therapy that just wave a wand and now you're slow down aging by 5% or something in humans. But if there's no indication for the FDA, then you can make no money in the short term, at least. So for us, in the current stage of operation, we want to treat diseases that are recognized by the FDA through things that are canonically aging. Like, so that they are not unique to that disease in particular. So we have, for example, 3 programs aimed at Alzheimer's disease. But these 3 programs, the same therapy that the program is making could be applied to anything, to ALS or to Parkinson's, because anything age-related, because they are not for Alzheimer's specific. So it happens that we found things where the best way to address a disease is through aging, through an aging therapeutic. In this case, through things like cell replacement, for example, or through a molecule we're trialing in Australia in December. But they have also tested in other models. So they, to me, in drug development for aging, I think one hallmark that you have a drug that really helps aging is that you test it in many models of different diseases, and it always works. This of diseases of aging, or diseases where the pathways involved are age-related. And so if it always works, that's at least the confidence that it will translate into humans, I think, to me, is a bit higher than because if you're just fixing Alzheimer's, this fucked up Alzheimer's mouse models, and that's all you're doing. I'm like, it's maybe you're just fixing those mice, and then doesn't translate to the human. But if it always works, always more so.
Yeah. You said something very important that might not be immediately clear to listeners. Like you get a drug approved for like one indication, right? So for one endpoint, like treating Alzheimer or whatever. And you're kind of saying, okay, you look for, well, how many other kind of indications or like general longevity effects could it have once approved on other things, even though you can sort of select it for the single endpoint, right? So this kind of speaks a bit to how the kind of scientific and market approval process under the FDA works. Wonder if you want to unpack this a bit.
Yeah, I mean, so I mentioned this in the context, actually, even in preclinical development, where we are testing this compound or this therapy, the mechanism of action, even preclinically, should work across conditions. And then when we go into the market, we pick one indication, and at Retro, where we have this very, in a way, quote unquote, dumb way of choosing indications, we just ask, what is aging? And with like aging is mortality and loss of quality of life, things that kill you, things that make your life worse. What are the top things there? Cancer, Alzheimer's, heart disease, pulmonary disorders, infectious disease in some contexts. They have osteoarthritis, lots of hearing, loss of sight, and so on. Then we go through the list. Okay, which ones we can come up with an idea that makes sense, and then, okay, let's go for it. We don't do like, this one weird mutation is cancer. No, we don't do. We're like, what are the big things that really matter, instead of getting distracted. And so when we find one therapy, then we also ask, okay, this therapy, where could it go? Maybe we could develop it for two indications at the same time, or other things like that. But yeah, ultimately, as a company, ideally, we need to make money in the short term, and then through that money, then continue doing the research that I think needs to be done to fully address the problem. This is a thing where there's 2 extremes. You could be like, let's just like take what currently works, and then it's like take it to clinic fast, and it's like, let's say, do a rapamycin trial or something. And then you have the like make money through whatever means. It's like develop a gene therapy for this rare disease. We'll make some money, or like just get something. And we're trying to go in the middle, where like we're trying to make money in the short term to be self-sustaining, but also through things that really still pointed straight at the goal, as opposed to getting distracted. Then the distractions probably will have consequences in company culture, like get us like the message that we are an aging company. It's really, and that everything we're doing is pointed at their work. We're happy to say that the things we're doing, so some companies have to produce data to please their investors, or to make money because they're going to die next year. We're happy to say that we don't do that, at least for now, because we have plenty of funding. It's pretty privileged.
Yeah, I wonder if your sort of your background in thinking like about institutions, especially like the FDA or the various kind of science funding organizations, in what way, so how did you choose among the myriad kinds of problems that you've seen there that, okay, we just have to accept the world as is and sort of see that we can get like one clinical endpoint through to get closer to like aging and longevity, right? And I'm kind of asking because I think that's a very important question, right? Because same as with longevity, there's this, it's called the Tocqueville effect, right? I'm not sure you heard about that,
No.
Right? But it's like, so he was describing that, as social conditions were getting better, people were protesting more, right? So And there's kind of a roundabout way of saying that many things only become a problem once a solution is available.
Yeah.
Right. So same with once you kind of see, like, I didn't notice longevity or like aging is even like a problem because, okay, there's not even like a real possibility to fix it. So therefore I didn't think about it or see it as a problem.
Yeah.
Right. And the same way that you could say that about things like the FDA, which is a problem, right? Or many of these science or research organizations. You kind of got to pick very carefully and choose what is actually like possible to solve, right? And then kind of make your bet.
Yeah, I guess I didn't know that phrase, the Tocqueville effect. I know there's something I say sometimes that's very similar, which is like, no one ever asked for the iPhone. Until it was shown to them, no one wanted it. Similarly, like there is the older one, which is like, if you ask people back in the day, when people were riding horses, what they wanted, they would say a faster horse. They would not say a car. You have to show it to them, and then it's like, oh yes. So indeed, if you are, let's say, 84 years old, I guess my grandmother is a good example. She's 80, maybe 45 now. No cancer, no heart attacks, no diabetes, maybe some arthritis, some loss of hearing. She can walk. She's a fairly healthy 84-year-old, you could argue. She is, by the medical standards, a healthy person, but she's not the person she was when she was 20. and it's like, but this comparison rarely occurs to us, that the idea that she could be, again, 20 or something, or 60 or whatnot, is something that we just not, it's a thought we don't think. It's something we don't ask for, is to begin with. And so, but if one saw an example of this, then people might be like, wait, this is actually, we're missing out on this. We don't have to accept this reality.
Yeah. In the same way, kind of what we choose kind of makes us have to accept certain things, right? So for example, your job now is to like get sort of through clinical endpoints and make the right selections. But it's harder for you, or you can't like effectuate thinking, for example, about like adaptive trial designs like that the FDA could do, right? So, right.
Yeah.
So,
so on the FDA, I guess it's like, we have interacted with many consultants that took the regulation, even people that used to be at the FDA themselves that we found. And I think the FDA is within reason a reasonable agency. There are things that are not so reasonable, but in general, I think that, like, suppose that I was the FDA and I was deciding under what to require for people to test drugs in humans, or like to manufacture cell therapies. Many of the things they require are what I will also kind of require. They're very much like at the early stage, they require less. You can just get away with less, let's say, constraints. Later, they impose more constraints. The trial designs, in some cases, you can do like dose a cohort. Let's say dose 20 people at once. In other cases, you dose one patient first. If it's riskier, then you wait. Then you dose another patient. Not reasonable. So I think the FDA is not like totally unreasonable as an agency. It's I guess one could do an experiment about the FDA. We could say, suppose we have an aging drug that actually works, and it's proven. Like, you do some. Well, I think it's like the thing that goes back to, well, how do you know it works, right? It's like, suppose you do a trial somewhere else and you have this data that says, you look, we're extending lifespan by 10%, and so on. Would they accept this drug? And I think that the answer is probably yes. If done in the right way. And in fact, I have calculated the trial size. So what would it take to convince the FDA to approve a longevity drug to show lifespan effect in humans, which you could do in 65 to 85-year-olds. You would need like a few thousand people, maybe 5,000 or something like that per arm for a 10% increase. This trial might seem very expensive, but it's not so expensive. Like, trial costs, there are laws to them. There are scaling laws to trials, which depend on the recruitment time for a trial, depends on the exclusion and inclusion criteria for the trial. And those would be easier for a longevity trial, because you could, in principle, enroll everyone. You're not enrolling this disease, you're enrolling literally everyone that has kind of that age. So enrollment is much faster. And then the other thing that drives costs is the total number of visits in the trial. So a visit is a patient goes to the hospital. So you could think of like number of patients time average number of visits. But for this trial, in principle, because it's just healthy old people, you can just dose them every month or at one-off if it's a one-off therapy. And then do remote visits. You can just do telemedicine. It's like ask them, hey, how are you feeling? If you can come by, if you have a side effect. You could observe them a bit more initially for safety, and then you can just leave them there, and then just measuring how long they live, which it's an easy objective endpoint to measure. Very, very clean in a way, very inefficient because you know exactly why they died. But you could reduce number of visits, which then leads to a reasonably cost human trial for lifespan human trial for humans. Once you had this drug that will work, it will still cost millions of dollars plus. But if you have strong evidence that you have an aging drug in humans, then you could take this, and then there are plausible indications you could discuss with the FDA, like age-related loss in intrinsic capacity that you could go for as an indication. And this is basically a composite endpoint for things like grip strength, cognitive function, like pulmonary function, maybe stuff like that. And if you improve all of that, you have improved slow the decrease of intrinsic capacity, and that could potentially be your aging indication. And then it could just be prescribed or even sold directly to consumers, which is an interesting thing that I was thinking about, because like the insurance model in the US, or the insurance in general, is predicated on rare events. That, you know, you have cancer, or this type of cancer, it's hard to predict you're going to get it. But it's suppose everyone is on this drug, or everyone could benefit from this, and now everyone is taking it. The insurer cannot spread costs around, so they have to charge everyone the cost of the drugs. So everyone's premium would go up. So effectively, it's the same as if we were to sell directly out of pocket to people, basically. And so Eli Lilly is doing this already. They're selling Ozempic direct to consumer. It's just like you can just get it from Eli Lilly directly. And so this might also be where things go. Just you get with phase 1 safety, phase 2, we show that we're indeed improving intrinsic capacity or the decline of that in a large, gigantic trial. And then I guess worst case, we go to Montana, and then people get it in Montana, which is not.
Well, good we're talking.
Or
Yeah.
or or it just gets fully approved normally, and then we just get doctors, just like retro doctors, just like sign, and retro sends you your drug, and then that will be
I'm curious, by the way, because you know I wrote the last Montana bill, right? So I was curious if it kind of fits what you're kind of thinking, right? So on the what specifically are you thinking about it? What you would need? Is it sort of mostly on the direct to patient side? Is it like on sort of getting more like data that you could collect, even though you couldn't necessarily submit it to clinical trials to the FDA? Or what would be kind of the most sort of upside for you from having kind of a different jurisdiction, considering where you currently at with your thoughts in retro?
Well, currently I haven't looked much at that in depth, to be honest. I don't have really formed thoughts on that. I mean, there's always the testing something in humans to see what it does kind of thing. However, at Retro, we're currently big on cell therapy. Cell therapies come with massive upsides, because we're effectively, I guess, our microglia therapy, we are talking about replacing 1/10 of the entire brain, young cells, by the microglia, that is. That's insane at some level, right? Or like, and people can't even imagine. It's like, and so we want to make sure that we don't harm anyone. So we want to be really sure when it passes, we have done everything feasible to ensure the therapy is safe. So in theory, we have the cells, we can just inject them into people tomorrow if someone really wanted them. But it's like, it will be quite nasty if you're like, oops, we forgot about X. We don't even have we just hired a head of regulatory, head of quality for Retro to make sure they're reasonable enough. So at some point, it would make sense to, once we're confident enough, there could be a sweet spot where we're confident enough, but not. Yeah, I guess that's what the thing is like. Could you be confident enough to put them into humans before doing the phase 1? Because for cell therapy, it's a phase 1 too. Really, you're treating disease patients. You don't inject these cells in healthy people. So it's almost like you could just go at phase 1 too directly. I guess one good thing about Retro is that our manufacturing is closed and almost containerized. So we could just like deploy a pod in Montana and manufacture there. We don't need a specific clean room in a specific place. So that would overcome.
We should definitely be talking more.
Yeah, but yeah, with some molecules, for example, we could imagine that's easier to do. But yeah, that's the Yes. Deeply, I haven't thought deeply about this.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, definitely we should talk more about that at some point, inside or outside of the podcast. But what we're trying to do in Montana really is to create sort of a state level regulatory space for medical services, right? So as opposed to FDA drug development. So previous right to trying laws kind of didn't cleanly separate between those two. And then at the state and medical services level, you can basically say, well, if it's proven safe, then you can do it. Right. So of course you still have like a scientific advisory board, and that, you should start with things that are actually effective, and the FDA kind of for some reason doesn't yet accept it. Yeah, but that's kind of the idea. So you can have a much more direct to patient pattern to patients.
Yeah, I guess. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, the proven safe. Like for us, for example, in the FDA framework, there is, let's say, to go to phase 1, there are some requirements as to what do you have to show preclinically before you go to phase 1. But things are it's sometimes not clear. It's very vibes based. The FDA,
Yeah.
similar to USCIS, U.S. immigration is very vibes based. It's like what counts evidence for an O1 visa? It's like, well, and so I guess something that would help regulatorily would be very well defined. Like if you show us these things, you get an automatic approval. You don't have to guess. That would be very nice. Because currently it's like this is partly why there's so many consultants around in biotech, because you have to be guessing. Well, what would the FDA think about this? And you cannot talk to the FDA. You have to ask people who used to be there and just guess what they and infer. That's kind of annoying.
Yeah. And that's kind of what the consultants bring, kind of these kinds of relationships, right? Asking the right person. But yeah, I'm here. And so one other thing, was wondering, because you spoke a bit about, if you remember, your blog post where you wrote about, agent 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0, the difference between those.
Oh yeah, I actually pulled the blog post like 1.0 and 2.0. Yes, I think how to solve aging 1, and we have the 3.0, I guess the combinatorial aspect. Yeah, I mean, I guess so. So I guess the framework here is a post I wrote in 2021. Time flies now. And the idea here is that we had what they call aging 1.0. This is I'm going to just throw some keywords out there: compromising, IGF-1, calorie restriction. This is where the field began. This is what works all the time, kind of. So these core pathways that are very fairly conserved across animal models that these things target and extend life. The issue is that the way these things work, they don't really scale, or they work. Some of these things are actually just mTOR inhibition. And mTOR inhibition basically is telling the individual, like, you're nutrient starved, keep being robust, stay robust, so you can survive longer until there are nutrients. Kind of, as a wishy-washy and wavy story. But you cannot knock out mTOR. You can just like do that. But also, it also has limits. Like CR doesn't make mice live twice as long. CR in monkeys it's done, and it's not like the mice live as. It's almost like the longer lived a being is, the harder it is to make it live longer through these means. So then we thought, okay, well, it seems that this is a dead end. Now, naively, I would say, some people sometimes look at what has extended lifespan as a kind of guideline to see what's worth keep doing. And so if you were to use that heuristic, you would say, well, what has been shown to extend lifespan the most? It is these things. So some might be willing to be like, okay, therefore we should keep investigating this stuff. And I'm like, no, that's a dead end. That's a local minima. We should like stop thinking about this. Aging 2.0 is being like, okay, what is, it's like, kind of like what's next there? And so here are things that I are like novel interventions that could have like bigger effects that are still kind of not yet fully understood, but show more promise. I guess now I would maybe have written that in some other way. Now maybe the way I think about what aging 2.0, or like where we should be at, is more like replace, deplete, and rejuvenate, maybe. So the idea is that if you want to make an organism actually younger, or to age slower, but say younger, you can kill all cells and put new young cells in there. So we call this retro micro replacement by turnover of stem cells. Some people are also talking about organ level replacement, which you could also do. You could just like swap out an entire organ. Now, in some cases, like the brain, it's hard to swap out the brain, but you can swap out parts of the brain or cells in the brain gradually. The thing of stem cells is that they know where to go, like bone marrow transplantation. You can just like, you don't need to put a bone in there. You can just like add cells to the marrow and then you get the turnover. Then we have rejuvenation by depletion. If you kill the old cells, not only classically senescent cells, but also if you kill the most damaged in a population of stem cells, let's say for HSCs, if you kill the most damaged HSCs in all, now the pool is now younger on average. So now your blood system is being made by younger or more functional HSCs. So now you have like a younger blood system through killing cells. So that's the depletion aspect. And then the rejuvenation aspect is in situ, making the cells that were already there be more functional. I guess in vivo reprogramming, or you could argue that tropomyosin or other, even or anything that boosts autophagy, for example, might help here, makes those cells either last longer or be more youthful. I will say here that if one thinks about, because there is reversing aging and slowing down aging, and the question of slowing down aging has been shown. There are many things slow down aging, we could argue, or but things that reverse aging, I think it's like 2 or 3. I would say, to me, for something to count as having reversed aging, it has to be permanent or semi-permanent. Like aging doesn't happen instantly. Like I might not wake up tomorrow being 60. That's very strange. That just doesn't happen. Now, if you have chemotherapy or something like that, maybe that's a different case. But short of that, and so if you ask, in the experimental literature, which things have been shown to be sticky? That when, if you have, let's say, a mouse on cocaine, an old mouse, the mice will move around more like a young mouse. But if you take the cocaine away, the mice back to normal. That doesn't mean the cocaine has rejuvenated the mouse. It's just that it was temporarily making it move more. So what things are sticky? Yamanaka, so the OSKM reprogramming, and this one TF called FOXM1, in vivo at least, which is TF, it's one of these FOXO transmission factors. Those, you apply them, then you take them out, wait a few days, the effects continue. That is, to me, like proof of true rejuvenation. This is something that rapamycin has never been shown to do, for example. Rapamycin just, to my knowledge, slows down, but doesn't reverse aging. And so, to me, the idea that you can actually reverse aging at cellular level is very intriguing. And so this is something we're definitely looking more into. It's like, how can we decouple pluripotency from rejuvenation, which is like, I think, doable. Maybe I'm more optimistic now than I used to be on this. And then aging 3.0, which is the other one I talk to in this post, is the combination of interventions. An idea that I've been talking about for a long time. It's one of the motivations behind Rejuvenate back then. And that Aubrey de Grey is now also doing combinations in one of his studies. So the idea here is that if we take, let's say, aging of cells, and I believe that you can basically and mostly fully rejuvenate cells with Yamanaka reprogramming or other reprogramming methods. But now we are not just cells. There are other things in us. Like, for example, if you look at like in depth loss of function in the human body, as we get older, we lose hearing, for example, and that's not because the hair cells get older or less functional, because it's because the cells responsible for the hearing die. There is nothing left to rejuvenate. So Yamanaka reprogramming will not help you there. But what can help is making iPSC-derived new cells and then putting them in there and then hoping that will bring back the function. Similarly, it could be that even if you have full body rejuvenation of all the cells, if you have this magic wand, it could be that the ECM, the cellular matrix, this actually I'm not sure about, but it could be there's some disagreements about the ECM and its importance if you had full rejuvenation. But it could be that some of these crosslinks or damages in the ECM cannot be fixed even by a young organism, in which case you have to develop crosslink breakers or novel enzymes or whatever it might be to rejuvenate the ECM. Or plaques in the arteries, like calcification of the arteries, the things that lead to atherosclerosis. You'll also imagine a young person that has still plaques and they still die of heart disease, even though their cells are young, and so on and so forth. So this idea would be, instead of doing one thing at a time, doing a combined assault on aging. And some of these things, like some effects might only be unlocked through combinations. Like, for example, suppose you want to make, to restore a pool of young T cells or a young T cells repertoire. The T cells are made in the thymus, which involutes with aging and it's kind of gone after a while. And the HSCs are also aging. So if you make the HSCs young, the HSCs, those immature T cells have nowhere to go to mature, to become T cells. If you only make the thymus young, then now you can make them, but the HSCs are aged, so you're not getting these young cells. You're getting like maybe like aged T cells. But then if you have both, now you have the true young T cell happening. So I think that I definitely also think it's where things will be, where you will see the
Yeah.
big.
I also found the idea very compelling, or describing sort of 1 to n and n to 1, right? So
Yeah.
1 to n is the current modality, right? So you have like one treatment and you give it to n, say 1,000 or whatever people. Then you kind of see the effect size, like between, random controlled and treatment group or whatever. But when you see the difference, and when you say, okay, n to 1, so you try different kinds of therapies, like in combination, and
Yeah.
try to solve like for one person, like for one indication, right? Which you could like flexibly choose, which is, I think, actually very compelling. Like if you think about it, right? I mean, that's kind of how why do we currently, and that's kind of what I understand at least, so correct me if I'm wrong, like currently the way we do clinical trial designs is basically just the first, like the other trial design, N to 1, that's not really widely kind of acknowledged or doesn't get you approvals, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are some cases where combinatorial therapeutics do occur. Like in oncology, most classically, there's for example a combination that's called FOLFOXIRI. So if I got my my outcomes, yes, it's FOXIRI. It's like folinic
Yeah.
acid, 5-fluorouracil, oxaliplatin are irinotecan, among other things. And so once it is or for tuberculosis or for HIV, there's combination high active therapy or something. But yeah, it is rare to see this combined therapy. Um, I think it's partly because you need to test more things in the trial. You need to justify to the FDA that these things are all needed. I think it's partly cost. Like if one really wanted to have a combined therapy for anything, you could do it if you have the money. It's just the risks are there, and also you could argue for most biotech companies, if you have just one thing that has a tiny effect, you could just make billions of dollars. So you could say why try harder? One could say, unless you really care about like actually solving the disease completely, as opposed to, it's like, to me, making an Alzheimer's patient decline 10% slower, kind of lame. You want to just stop it. And so, uh, and so it's like, sure, you could make a ton of money by slowing it down, but like, you could be a rich guy that's in the cemetery dead with Alzheimer's. Like, no, it's like, it's serious.
Yeah. I mean, my dream is kind of to like create an organizational institutions that allow for these kind of different trial designs and like don't make them like conditional for pre-market approval necessarily in the same ways, right? Because this way we'd have like more market mechanisms and sort of more like the consumer reports or competing agencies type of scenario where you just can get just much more things to market faster. So right now it's like with one pipeline, mostly for 1 to n studies, and it costs a couple $100 million. In your case, you're able to hack the system a bit, found like clever ways, utilize places like Australia or whatever. But by and large, what's kind of worrying me is that the return to biotech R&D is like declining. It's declining quite rapidly. I'm pretty sure you've seen from news stuff,
Yeah.
right? So individual companies like yours, and with like very capable leadership, can probably succeed and still make a lot of money. But what does it mean for the field, and especially longevity as a whole, right? Because if this kind of keeps continuing and the timelines being that long or that expensive, we need still the thousands of companies to try, right?
Yeah, I don't know. My initial reaction is like, it's all cope, or like the R&D, or like the whole biotech industry is kind of wrong, or like it's looking at things in the wrong way. What do I mean by this? A lot of drug development works by finding a protein and hitting it really hard. Like lock and key, there's a target, you're hitting the target, you're doing this one little thing. And that works very often. But for age-related diseases, everything breaks. And so finding the one thing that maybe even, sometimes there are one things that kind of works. But like more and more, it becomes hard to treat these things without treating the elephant in the room, which is aging. And you cannot treat aging by a molecule that inhibits just one thing. It could have some effect for sure. Like rapamycin inhibits mTOR, and that's one thing, but those are rare. And so, for example, to us, it's obvious that cell replacement is something that's going to be hugely successful and treat tons of conditions. And now we ask, well, why aren't there a million companies doing cell replacement? Why are we the only company doing microglia replacement? There's another company called Nomoglia. That's we shall see how they go, but we shall see. But like, okay, let's say 1.5 or 2. This is strange to me. How many companies are doing like KRAS targeted cancer drugs? Why is this? And I think this is just like a no, it's either heavy behavior or like BC like risk intolerance, or maybe that there's some structural things in the industry. But I think it's not an intrinsic feature of the state of human knowledge. It's more like a reflection of the social factors in the way the industry is organized. Like I don't know, like so sometimes people say that ideas are irrelevant and execution is everything. I heavily disagree. It's like our ideas are like at least if you are not having, it's like our ideas are so good that even that no one else is working on them, or almost no one. You could argue, well, this means that we're wrong. We're going to obviously fail.
Yeah.
You shall say the thing about like nature is that it's not up to us. It's not up to the market. It's about nature and reality to test if you're right.
Yeah. But I mean, I think much of your, especially earlier work, is much about like how institutions and incentives matter, right? So if like this is the way to like make a lot of money, then most people will go that way,
Yes.
right? Instead of the other ways where it's much harder to do, or it's kind of not sure if you can get the thing approved, or
I guess like one good example. Let's say Alzheimer's. So like mechanistically, why do Alzheimer's companies look the way they look like, and not like retro? So part of it is that because in this idea that we are doing is like micro replacement. People have talked about this for 10 years. This is not like taking a brain kind of idea creation. It's like this. Many labs, even from famous labs, have talked about this as a like yes, this even in mice. Mice, they are published literature wipes out Alzheimer's, even in the nastiest models. And I think it's partly because like one, people were like, well, there are amyloid plaques. We can remove them because and they're antibodies, and they're like mouse models that have plaques. We can test in those mice and we can remove the plaques. But that didn't quite work that well. And then people go like, we don't understand Alzheimer's. What are they are not targeted for Alzheimer's. It's very hard. And then what are we going to model in vitro? And you don't need that. You don't have to, like for the FDA, you don't need efficacy. Mostly you need toxicity. If you have a strong theory for why it's going to work, you can just go for it. You can use it to show it's safe, and just go for it and see what it does. And if your effect size is huge, or if you expect effect size is huge, your trial size is smaller, so it's cheaper. Like if you're curing Alzheimer's, if you have suppose you have a 6 out of 6 cure rate, that may be enough, because like in the control group, everyone just falls off a cliff, but in your 6 patient, it's like, whoa, my brain is like so clean now. But and so from a gambling, from let's say betting portfolio point of view, to us it makes sense to make this bet, this huge if true bet. But somehow the other companies, they had like there's no good model to test Alzheimer's. There's no sporadic AD model. There's like weird FAD model where you can test mechanistically plaque removal, for example. It's hard to measure. Let's say even for our autophagy drug that we are trialing in Australia, the mechanism is autophagy upregulation. Well, how do you measure autophagy upregulation in the brain? Like plaques, you can measure through PET MRI or something, PET scans. But like autophagy in the brain is like, how do you know? You can measure it in blood maybe, but like we can measure it in vitro. We can measure it in mice, in humans. So I think to me this is like, well, this is just a small inconvenience, but it's not a roadblock. But to other companies, maybe it's almost like they rigidly want to follow a playbook where there's a target, biomarker, and then there's like maybe some like I don't know, a good model, a good mouse model, or some disease model, and maybe even genetic evidence for the target. I think that's another thing with aging is like often genetic evidence from GWAS is good, but not with aging. But everyone is aging, so everyone some people say, oh, the human lifespan, the variance in human lifespan attributable to genes is not huge. I'm like, yes, how? Because it doesn't vary much to begin with. But like if you had if you could genetically engineer humans completely, edit as much as you want, you could make people live arbitrarily, just like fix all the damage pathways and so on, and then your GWAS would show huge variance of genes. But that's just like And that's the thing with aging. That's and also I guess some people get causality wrong in bio. That's another of my blog posts that I'm just on a rant here, but I'm going to say something spicy, but there's no cause for Alzheimer's. There's no cause for any one disease.
Yeah.
It's more like lottery tickets. You hit your head, lottery ticket. You have gingivitis, lottery ticket. Inflammation, lottery ticket. You were born with presenilin 1 or PP mutations, lottery ticket. You're getting older, more tickets. And so the more lottery tickets you have, the more likely that you will get Alzheimer's. Not guaranteed that you'll get Alzheimer's. That's why there's no one cause. And you could do everything right and you can still get Alzheimer's, or you could have all the tickets and not get Alzheimer's. And so some of these one thing at a time targeting approaches, it might help for some patients, but not all. And if you're only helping some patients, then you need to stratify and select those patients in the trial. So the trial more expensive, so maybe it's not worth doing to begin with. So I think it's only through big effects and universal cures that we can actually break out of this curse of reducing R&D efficiency. So we need to make big bold bets.
Yeah. I really hope our listeners can appreciate how important this kind of insight is, right? Because what you're kind of describing is that solving aging or longevity is almost kind of a different paradigm than how, regulatory agencies, other companies, and much of research in science really looks at the problem, right? So even the causal model is kind of something you need to question. The single indication and endpoint model, these are all things that we're kind of running up against sort of an existing science paradigm. So we talked a lot about that. I'm curious kind of to close it off. I spent the next 10, 15 minutes. To what degree have you used or your research on kind of philosophy, how we look at these problems, or kind of how you think about these things? Because I actually have a very similar background, so also philosophy, epistemology, and a lot of sort of critical and empirical and whatever. It's just okay, if you don't start from the philosophy, I don't get how anyone could have correct beliefs about the world, other than just so I wonder to what degree that's also influencing what you do now, right?
Yeah, I guess it's more like the philosophical way of thinking that the specific things in philosophy. I have read, let's say, Michael Humer's work on anarcho-capitalism and Chalmers on consciousness, and
yeah. Humer was here on the podcast as well. He's one of my favorite authors. I read almost everything he ever wrote. Yeah.
But it's more like the thinking. So one of the first books I ever read that to me was foundational. I guess it was as foundational to me as Less Wrong was to rationalists, perhaps.
Yeah.
It's Attacking Faulty Reasoning. It's a book on argumentation theory from Edward. Mm-hmm. And the book talks about what's a reasonable argument, or even things like something could be sufficient but not necessary in an argument, something.
Yeah.
You could have some idea that implies something you observe, but that doesn't mean that this thing is true. There could be other things that could also imply that, for example. And so when observing or the Duhem-Quine hypothesis that data only makes sense in the light of the theory. There's no such thing as just data or just being empiric. You have to have a framework within which to observe that data. Similarly, at the same time, often in biology, people are not Bayesian enough. The way I think about things is I observe data and observe arguments that you'll have, and then I try to infer models under which what we observe makes sense. And what we observe itself is not 100% known. If we do an experiment, or if we see something in the literature that's reported, that's not 100% true necessarily. It's I don't know if it's true. There could be a mistake. So you have to take everything with a grain of salt. Okay, this thing's kind of true. You could say if 10 labs have shown this thing, probably more true. If it's the same lab publishing the same thing, maybe a bit sus. And so you infer these models. And if you have these models, you could then infer, well, if you're super sure that this is the case, you can assume something of the world that has not been just tested, but that should be true. And that way you can do these jumps of reasoning that let you move faster. Biologists are not prone to this. They might say, well, this has never been shown, or how do you know, and so on and so forth. The work for them.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that non-philosophers kind of often not aware or think they have to structure their thinking or what they're saying in the form of an argument, right? So, and kind of, learning that very early, kind of formal logic and things like that. It's just okay, what's the argument? How do we arrive at that?
Yeah, I mean,
and then
So I guess when looking at the world, one could be, for example, enumerate and say, this thing can only be in 10 ways. And if you, let's say, discard all 9, 10, the 10 must be true. But another way of thinking is like, the world is full of possibilities. And it's like, maybe there are like 10 things we haven't considered and you have to actually test every single thing. I think scientists are more prone to that thinking, which it makes sense in many contexts, and not maybe enough of the first one, where you can basically more like rationally top down be like, okay, it has to be this. But the good thing of what I say, everything I say, is that it's all testable. All of these things, it's more like you're making some jumps, and ultimately this is what I think taste is. It's a way to prioritize things based on models, but you're still testing in reality at the end. It's like ultimately, this is what I like about science. It's not up to whoever to decide if we're right. It's up to nature. So ultimately, we all will agree on what is or is not the case.
Yeah. There's one thing you said that you also wrote about Robin Hanson's book, The Elephant in the Brain, which also influenced me a lot. But I was surprised to read in your review that you're very critical of the self-deception pieces. Not sure if you remember that, but I was a bit surprised at that because that was one of the takeaways that convinced me the most. Not so much looking into the science like you have and like, can we actually get data to it, but just on an intuitive basis. Yeah, actually, I'm deceiving myself quite a lot. And actually, like that other people deceive themselves, that's quite a good explanation for how they're doing.
Yeah. Maybe I've updated some that. I have to read again what I wrote.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think maybe people are more insane than I thought we were. We're like, wow, like strange things going in people's brains all the time. I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, or like sometimes people do things where they're understanding why we did something and then thinking back, being like, oh, I was actually wanting to get this over.
Yeah. I mean, just to give you an example, because, and not to be mean to any particular individual or person that's listening to this, but when you're a typical like scientist, even a longevity scientist, right? So then people are thinking, okay, I want to like save the world from aging. And that's kind of your professed motive. But then you go into like the science and figure out the scientific problems. But very often you're just like, okay, just to get another cozy job, right? And it's kind of more, so if you really try to solve it, you'd go to do things that are really hard that others are probably not yet doing because, there is like very first principles reasons why we haven't succeeded yet. We need to try things that are different, but people are, especially in academia and when you're kind of very stuck in an institution, this is not what you're doing, right? So that's kind of a bit of an example for me or a strong example of me of self-deception. And then when I kind of joined, this is like not that I or anyone is immune to that. I don't think anyone is. I think we can kind of put ourselves in the state of mind trying to overcome it, but it just seems just something that's so obvious to me.
Yeah. I guess like the question is like, why do we do this? So it's maybe harder to ask than I thought when I wrote that piece. Like for example, when I introspect, like why do I do the things I do? It's like I am not like obsessed with aging as such. I'm not in fear of death, and I've never been. I think it's like life is a dance party, and it's nice while it lasts, and the longer the best. But it ends, and that's okay. I like everything is okay. Kind of like the more the better. And that's a very interesting problem. Like someone else could say, my grandmother died and then this happened. Now I wonder, like, it could be true for them that that's why they are doing what they are doing. But maybe you could say, well, maybe I would have an incentive to give a nice rosy story about why instead of being like, it's fun.
Exactly. We also need to sound very confident and very inspiring and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, but it's like, I don't know, I'm just a guy or something. I'm just like, I guess I would think myself down to earth and fairly authentic. I'm not trying to like sound impressive. I think that's how I choose to live my life. Now you could say, why do I choose to live my life like that? What am I trying to do there?
Yeah.
Or it's like, or I say that I really value truth, for example. I guess you could say, you go ask yourself, okay, suppose you meet someone that's just like that professes to believe in truth. What do they do? And then it's like, is that what I am doing? And so, well, I know in my blog, for example, I pay people for finding mistakes. It seems that something that values truth, we're willing to like buy truths, buying people for correcting them. How many people have this? Not many. Not many people, or scientific journals. If there is a mistake, do they pay you for finding a mistake? No. Like, do they care? I assume they maybe care in some abstract level, but are they putting money on the line? No. And so that's I guess a way to work around it, being like, if you're someone else, or similar thing where when we're stuck, if you're like, okay, if I have a friend that's stuck in this way, what do I tell my friend? Okay, now tell yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was also kind of how I realized, like, I also had this, like, when I was young, why does nobody care, like, about the truth or whatever? Why did I not put, like, any effort into, like, the actual reading material and what they're saying is true, even though they have, like, really strong opinions and they, like, go to student protests and there should be free education or whatever. I think they haven't looked at the arguments and all of that. But then I was also realizing myself, like, sometimes I'm having debates and okay, in this case, I was also not looking for the actual truth. I was just thinking I'm right, and kind of my mind told me that, or like deceived myself. And kind of also, my kind of status in the community or with other people was hinging on it. It's like nobody. I think nobody is immune to it, but I think you can overcome it. And I think kind of what you've been doing with the blog. I did kind of something similar, right? So during like the COVID and the first 2-3 years, I went down the like rabbit hole, like also the Michael Humer, Alex Tabarrok on the FDA, whatever. These are all the problems. I mean, you take a broad view and really make me question a lot of things. And you need to find like some true beliefs about the world that others are not yet seeing. And then you really need to go double down and like build a business. And like, okay, you have to accept some things as given, right? I'm not going to like change the FDA, or I'm not going to like, whatever, right? So, but you have to make these trade-offs, and then you can't like literally always look for the truth, right? Because you need to focus like on one thing that you need to succeed, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this has been with me for a long time. Like, I remember, like, even in high school, I would see like online and see people debating each other. I remember there were some even there were these communists, and I guess in Spain we have a number of communists and I guess fascists that using characters. There's like debate people, I guess, of people that claim to be their old teenagers, and they would kind of hate each other. I'm like, why do they hate each other? They are. I see them both like, oh, they're mistaken, and like it's sad that they are this way, but I don't hate them. Maybe I just can't hate people. I just find it difficult to hate anything. I think it's sad that bad things exist in the world, and so I thought, okay, but I think many people have the reaction where something is not them, something is maybe wrong or something they don't believe. They hate it, or like they want to push it away. Or they have this like reaction. Whereas to me, it's like, maybe I'm wrong. So it's like there's this difference here, and you could get curious about why. Why do they believe something else? Or maybe it's because they are right and you're wrong. Maybe it's because it's just a preference or something, or it's some aesthetic thing, or maybe what is it? Like
Yeah. I kind of almost think like in hindsight, the sort of me being, or us, or you probably as well, like, hey, we need to know the truth or whatever. Maybe we're kind of the ones who are deeply irrational, right? Because everyone else is kind of realizing, what Brian Kaplan is saying in the myth of the rational voter, right? So there is no incentive to accumulate political information or like correct beliefs because you just have one vote and it doesn't affect anyone. So we kind of very irrationally all invest all this time into like being right or having correct beliefs into all these questions, where everyone else is just rational, just ignoring it because it doesn't make a whole difference for them. So instead they focus,
Well, I guess maybe I kind of buy this like more like deep GMU view that like everyone is always rational. It's just we value different things. So we really value truth, for example, for its own sake, and that's why we have all this information that facts that we don't necessarily use, or people care less. Like I find, for example, there's a tweet from a while back that the most thoughtful, smarter, correct people I know are often bloggers and people on the internet like that. Founders, even very successful founders, are sometimes borderline insane, or they have very enhanced beliefs, yet they're very successful in their domains. They don't care about truth in general as such. They maybe care a normal amount, and then they just like they maybe speak about the things where they're working on. Everything else is like, well, whatever. Some other people don't care about being self-aware that much, and they just go through life in various ways. Now, I think you could say that for a lot of people, this may be the meta thing of like, if you from the future were able to go back and tell yourself, be more self-aware or be more rational or care more about truth, how many would take the deal or given trade-offs? To me, for example, like there's so much personal dysfunction in the world, both like intellectual and emotional, but like I think would probably benefit if there were more sanity in the world. I think people themselves, if they were shown how insane they are, they would want to be more sane, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Especially if you're pointing out the specifics and if you make the better solution consumable. That's my thesis, right? People just accept the irrationally accept the irrationality until there's just like a better way, and the better way is like cheap, it's like affordable to them and attainable to them, right? So that applies to longevity drugs as well as like different institutions, right? So we don't have to like go out there and convince people like on an intellectual level, hey, we should solve aging or whatever. And, if we can live like hundreds of years or whatever. This is more like, okay, we give people like a thing, a drug, a treatment, and it works. Right? And then people will kind of adopt or form their beliefs around them, right? So get to the Torquil effect, right? So people will see problems once the solution is readily available.
Yeah. Yeah, there's all these arguments people give sometimes about like, what about the rich people, or like these drugs, or like, what about like, or even things like, oh, what if we live longer but people are still sick or something? And I'm like, it almost feel like they're like cash thoughts that they have thought but not really thought through and fully integrated into, or they haven't tried to understand what the developers of aging drugs are doing or want to do or what intentions are. So yeah, like I guess similarly, when I find someone that seems insane to me or like that, first I try to be like, is there a model under which this makes sense? Because like to some extent, there's a book I like called Existential Kink, that they have this frame that goes about like having this evidence of wanting. The fact that you believe something or are doing something is evidence that part of you wants that. And so why might that be? And then from that to understand your person, then you could try to be like, okay, I see maybe you don't want to get them to believe what you believe. Maybe you just want to leave them alone. It's going to be so much work. Or maybe with a sentence, you can just change their mind. Then you can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Great. This was a really fun conversation. Is there anything else you've been thinking about recently that you're or writing about that's sort of outside of your sort of longevity biotech work?
Yeah, I guess that would be the idea of agency, which
Oh, yeah.
so this is
Which is, I think, underlying our conversation a bit, like, the self-deception, how much agency, how do we assert agency, like how do we choose, and your few thoughts.
Yeah, so I guess agency, or I guess one thing of like, if one searches like agency or agentic online, now one gets a bunch of AI results. But before the AI agent stuff, there was this idea that of being an agent, that instead of being like a puppet of your environment, that basically, like, imagine you take someone in, let's say, in a poor neighborhood somewhere, you can kind of predict statistically what kind of person they will become. If they are just the average, molded by environment, they just become a kind of person. And so I think in life we'll have this continue button. We'll pressing, we wake up, next, breakfast, next, shower, next, and go to work, next. And then you just work on these loops, and we make assumptions about the world. Like I drove to Retro this morning from San Francisco, and then I took the same path I take always. I have vaguely thought that there are two highways, I guess, but there are, I could have rented a helicopter and flown here. There are all these random things that you could actually do technically that may not be the things that make sense. So the idea of agency, to some extent, is noticing that the world is full of opportunities, or that there are things you are not doing, thoughts you are not having, that you could be having instead. There are. And the thing is that for problems that you have, it's easy to think about solutions, or for questions that you have, you can think of answers. For questions you're not asking, it's really hard to come up with answers because like you're not asking them. Like one example of this, so when I wrote this blog post about I think it was called "Stop Making So Many Assumptions." So when I was in the US, when I was on my O1 visa, someone offered me to advise their startup or to write for their magazine and be paid. Now that's illegal under an O1 visa. You can only have one job for the company you are working for, and the thought that you could have multiple concurrent O1 visas never occurred to me, even though I had skimmed through the O1 regulations, and there's nowhere there it says you can only have one. And moreover, the way to know if you can have many is simply to email a lawyer. And my immigration lawyer, who I already had worked with, and he told me, indeed, you can have many, and that it's free. So I had limited myself for no good reason. I had this assumption that I didn't challenge. And so I'm like, wow, we walk through the world with these things in our heads. We just assume, and often, like sometimes checking assumption is expensive. I could be Elon and say, I could make a spreadsheet and be like, yes, making a rocket it's 100 times cheaper than the state of the art. But actually proving that can take 10 years and a ton of money. Fair. But many assumptions are not like that. They are very cheap to test. So now I think, okay, how do we ask these questions we're not asking? How do we get us in the habit of breaking out of our and just like do other things? And I don't yet have a good answer for this. So this is what the blog post I'm writing is an exploration of the new one. I will write it. I will finish at some point. Is what can we do here? One thing that I seem to be coalescing around is the idea of like doing some like agency journaling, where every week or definitely every year, but maybe also every week, one could write about what you did during that week, then little tweaks you could have done in that week. Like, you could have, let's say, if you went to a party, you could have said, well, I didn't really enjoy that. Why did I do that? Maybe because I thought I was going to meet some cute girls, whatever. And then you could say, okay, I don't want this. I don't have to go to this party. It's okay. Next item, be thoughtful about why you're going to an event, a social event. And plus also things that are completely unrelated to what you did. You could say, this past week, I could have gotten into jiu-jitsu, but I didn't. This past week, I could have booked a flight to Bali and to chill there. This past week, I could have, wrote a lot of research to start a company. This past week, I could have started a podcast. This past week, I could have like stopped meditating. So I have meditation practice. I could stop doing this. This past week, I could have, giving up to all these things that are not thoughts that you have thought, but it's almost like stopping and forcing yourself to generate plausible things that you could have done. And I think maybe I hope that through that, to see how it goes, through that, one sees those opportunities more easily.
Yeah. I think this has definitely been like what was been underlying this whole conversation, right? Sort of the agency. And also, like, one thing that I was thinking is, and you can apply that both at the macro and the micro scale, is the difference between going wide and going deep, right? So if you only go wide, right, then you won't have a very high impact, right? Because only by going deep, kind of the causality facts, like now this person needs like this treatment or whatever, like the whole thing that leads to getting there. I'm not sure if that's a good example. But and if you imagine this kind of as a tree, right? So you invest time to go wide, and then sort of you explore the different sub branches kind of tangentially and draw the connections between them. And then then you choose to go deep in something, which then kind of opens up other avenues and connections to the wide tree, right? Because, only sometimes like at the bottom of something do you find like a connection that's really relevant at another tree, right? Yeah. So I think the analogy of like forcing yourself in different domains to give yourself time to go wide, like most people, are going deep into their past usually at some point to be successful in their career, but sort of find the space that you can still kind of go wide. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah. I guess like it's easy, like the going deep, for example. But I guess first, people have different preferences. Like you could have a very, like someone could really enjoy going deep in one thing. They could become, let's say, world expert at designing GPUs, for example, which I cannot do. Or it could be like have a broad view and be really good at being agentic, or like pointing out what matters for a given domain. But I think some people do get stuck into one or the other. Like you could be, for example, in this pressing continue button, like, let's say, suppose you're in a career path, you study mechanical engineering, you do a master's in mechanical engineering, as I did, you get a job. My first job was in a company that makes electric cars. And you're like, okay, I'm going to just make electric cars. Now you could imagine a life where Jose, instead of being here, is an engineer in some random place in Coventry, UK. It's being miserable there. It's like being, well, this sucks. Why am I doing this? Or something when I'm 40 or anything like this. But now it's too late. So I think it's important to, and this may be the hardest question of them all. It's like to ask, what do you want in life? It's like, what are you going for? Because it's not like kind of going in seemingly meaningless loops.
Yeah. And it kind of is the difference between high and low agency, right? So one low agency failure mode is like to be at one company, just do what you're told, do the same thing over and over. And the other failure mode is that you're like too wide, that you're like stuck in academia and institutions and you're like studying everything, but I like to far removed from the real world and never do impact this thing, right? And sort of the high agency is kind of too.
Well, on the high agency, something I have in the blog post potentially is to say of the high agency barista. So it could be that someone, after having considered every single possibility there is, they, all things considered, given their preferences, they choose to be a barista, and that's what's good for them. Maybe they really they love making coffee, maybe, and maybe they want to be in Santa Cruz at this specific place where many surfers go because they, whatever it might be. But um, they could be very agentic in that sense, in that, or at least there seems to be agency. There are two components that they need to figure out. One is the being aware of what's happening, of what you could do, and then doing those things. Because some people could look like NPCs from the outside, but from within, they might have considered all these things, and they have chosen to live the life they live. Like, you could argue that in some contexts, someone really successful could be an NPC. They're still just climbing a ladder that was in front of them.
Yeah.
Without noticing that that's what they are doing. They're not thinking about what they actually want. They're just like going ahead, and they look agentic, but they aren't. They're just like maybe one day they feel they have this like midlife crisis, and they're like, holy shit, I hate being a doctor. Why did I do this to myself? I hate this, and then they drop out and go to Bali or something to find themselves. And like that's it's the earlier the better to know what one wants.
Amazing. No, really fun conversation. Really, really enjoyed this, and we could probably go on and on.
Yeah.
And I hope we will at some point. We're in the same industry, in a similar space, right? Reads, we have similar people that we know, read similar books. So, yep, this was really hopefully also as fun for our listeners. And just to close it off, Jose, where can people find you and interact with your work, or anything that you want to draw attention to, that you want to invite our listeners' attention to?
So yeah, you can find me at you can read my blog at Nintil, that's Nintil.com, or on my Twitter, refuse to say X, at RTRKL, or just search my name. If you search my full name, which is, there's only one of me, you will find me everywhere. I don't think there's some things that could be of interest. Well, I guess indirectly I would say, so every month I write a links post, and you can find there all of the random things I find interesting that month. You just like, you will see that there are many extremely random topics that I find intriguing in the world.
Amazing. Jose, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.